At 2:47 a.m., a phone began to ring in the darkness, quiet at first, then insistent, cutting through the stillness like a blade. On the third ring, it was answered, and in that single moment, a promise made 16 years earlier cracked open again. A little girl, broken ribs, fractured wrist, bruises blooming across her back, lay alone in a hospital bed, and the man who put her there wasn't hiding in the shadows. He wore a badge. He wore authority. He wore the kind of power that silences most people before they ever dare to speak. By sunrise, 97 bikers would already be on the highway, engines rumbling like a rolling storm, riding straight through the desert toward the child of a fallen soldier. They came not because they knew her, but because someone had to stand between her and the very man sworn to protect her. They came because a promise, once buried by time, grief, and guilt, refused to stay buried any longer. But when they reached that hospital, they discovered something far darker than a child in danger. Because beneath those fluorescent lights, behind those silent doors, sat a truth wrapped in fear, secrets, and a kind of betrayal that doesn't just break families, it shatters them. They thought they were there to protect one girl. Instead, they had walked straight into the heart of a secret someone was willing to kill to keep buried. And when the stepfather returned, not alone, not apologetic, but with backup and a confidence only a corrupt man can wear, the bikers realized something chilling. They weren't just standing up for a child. They weren't just keeping a promise. They weren't just fighting a single man. They were walking straight into a war they could not afford to lose. If you're here because you believe no child should ever be left unprotected, if stories of courage, loyalty, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things matter to you, I gently ask that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear a story of hope today. Your support helps these stories travel farther, and it tells the world exactly where you stand, in the corner of the vulnerable and against those who abuse their power. Thank you so much for being here. Now let's begin. They arrived without sirens, without shouting, without a single engine revving in challenge. One by one, the motorcycles rolled into the hospital parking lot, their headlights cutting through the early morning haze like silent witnesses. 97 riders, leather jackets worn from years on the road, boots dusty from desert miles, lined up with the precision of a military procession. Not a word passed between them. Not a single man or woman broke formation. They simply stood beside their machines, creating a wall of quiet strength in a place usually reserved for fear and pain. Inside the hospital, nurses stopped mid-step. Conversations died in their throats. Clipboards lowered. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. They didn't know who these people were or why they had come. Only that 97 bikers had formed two perfect rows outside the entrance as the sun struggled to break the horizon. One security guard reached instinctively for his radio, his voice unsure, his message half-formed. Another guard simply watched, shoulders tense, as if waiting for the first sign of trouble. But no trouble came. These riders weren't moving fast, weren't shouting, weren't forcing anything. They were simply present. Their stillness carried its own kind of weight, as if each of them had been summoned by something larger than themselves. And though they stood together, their eyes all pointed upward toward a single lit window on the third floor. Behind that window, a small silhouette stood motionless. Lily. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, her breath fogging a tiny circle in front of her. Her wrist was bandaged. Her ribs ached every time she inhaled. And yet, something inside her shifted as she stared down at the impossible sight below. Dozens of strangers had arrived in the gray light of morning, forming a silent shield around a hospital she believed she would leave today, alone, unprotected, unseen. No one had ever shown up for her like this. She didn't know who they were or why they'd come. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming, if this was just another soft illusion her mind created to help her escape from the pain. But the longer she stared, the more real it became. The riders didn't vanish. They didn't move. They didn't look away. They were here for her. Down below, the nurses exchanged uncertain glances. Security whispered among themselves. Someone muttered, What is this? A protest. Another replied. They're too organized. Too calm. A third said quietly, that girl, whoever she is, she must matter to them. And she did, even if Lily didn't understand it yet. The mystery of their arrival wrapped itself tightly around everyone watching. How did 97 bikers know about a little girl in a hospital bed? What did they intend to do? Why weren't they leaving? Why weren't they saying anything? Their silence was louder than any threat could have been, louder than any engine, louder than any fight. It was the kind of silence that said, we're here, we're staying, and no one harms her again. But Lily, staring through the glass, didn't yet know the story that brought them to her. She didn't know the promise that had been broken 16 years ago. She didn't know about the man riding at the head of the formation, the man who had been too late once, but refused to be too late again. She didn't know the storm that was gathering in the halls below, or the battle that was coming when the man who heard her learned these riders were standing guard. All she knew was this. For the first time in years, she didn't feel completely invisible. Her small hand, bruised and trembling, lifted slowly from her side and pressed against the glass as if reaching for them. A simple gesture, a quiet plea, a flicker of hope. And though she couldn't hear them from 3 stories above, 97 hearts answered that unspoken call in unison. Stay with me for what happens next. Because this arrival, the calm before the storm, was only the beginning of a promise being rewritten, a secret rising to the surface, and a fight no one expected these riders to take on. The quiet line of motorcycles outside the hospital fades, and we slip backward, away from dawn, away from the silent formation, away from the girl watching from the 3rd-floor window. Back into a dark room, where a man slept with a promise he had not kept. At 2:47 a.m., Hawk's phone lit up on the nightstand. The sound was sharp, almost foreign at that hour, and for a moment he didn't recognize it. He blinked awake, eyes adjusting to the dim blue glow. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He nearly let it ring out, until something in his chest tightened, the kind of instinct a man develops only after losing too much. He answered on the 3rd ring. Mr. Daniels? A woman's voice, steady, professional, but carrying a weight she couldn't disguise. This is Rebecca Chun, New Mexico Child Protective Services. I'm calling about Lily Morrison. Hawk sat upright, so quickly the room spun. The name hit him like a steel to the ribs. Lily, Jake's daughter. He swallowed hard. What happened? She was admitted 4 hours ago, Rebecca said. 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, deep contusions across her back. Her stepfather claims it was an accident. The word accident felt sour, wrong, almost obscene in the silence of Hawk's room. His jaw clenched. Was it an accident? There was a pause, a long one, the kind that tells you everything before a single word is spoken. Finally, the woman whispered, the doctors don't believe so, but he's a decorated police officer. We can't remove her unless we prove she's unsafe, and we have 24 hours before she's released back to him. That was all Hawk needed to hear. He was on his feet before the call even ended, pulling on jeans, boots, a shirt that still smelled faintly of motor oil and Arizona dust. His mind wasn't racing, it was burning through years of silence, distance, cowardice. Because this wasn't just a girl he had once known. This was Jake's daughter, Jake Morrison, the man who gave Hawk the one thing he never forgave himself for losing, a chance to live. The memory hit him in a single flash, sand, heat, and the sound of gunfire exploding too close. Jake dragging him behind cover, the 2 of them bleeding, choking on dust. Jake's face ghost white, his voice trembling as he grabbed Hawk's vest and forced out the words. Promise me, Hawk, promise me you'll look after Sarah and the baby. The same promise Hawk broke the moment he convinced himself Jake's family didn't need him anymore. Back in the present, he grabbed his keys off the counter. They slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. He didn't swear, didn't breathe, just bent down, picked them up, and held them tight. Where is she? He demanded. Tucson to Albuquerque is about 620 miles, Rebecca replied. You can't possibly. I'll be there in 8 hours, Hawk growled. Don't let her leave that hospital. Mr. Daniels, I think you should understand. But he had already ended the call. He stood alone in the dark house, fists curled around his keys so tightly the metal dug into his skin. Guilt pressed against him, heavy and familiar. 16 years. 16 years of believing Lily was safe. 16 years of convincing himself that stepping back was the right thing. 16 years of letting that promise gather dust. And now a CPS agent was telling him that Jake's little girl, the one with the big blue eyes who once fell asleep on his shoulder, was lying in a hospital bed, bruised, broken, and alone. Hawk exhaled through his teeth, a low sound like a growl he couldn't hold back. "I'm sorry, Jake," he whispered into the empty room. "I'm coming now." But what Hawk didn't know, not yet, was that this wasn't the first time the girl had been hurt. And the truth behind that injury, behind all of them, was darker than anything he was prepared to face. Hawk stepped outside into the cool desert air, just as the first thin line of dawn began to touch the horizon. He wasn't alone. Word had traveled faster than he expected, maybe faster than it should have. But sometimes a promise, once awakened, has a way of spreading through the people who know the weight of loyalty. One rider pulled into the driveway, then another, and another. Within minutes, the low rumble of engines filled the morning quiet like rolling thunder gathering strength. Men and women climbed off their bikes, faces solemn, eyes sharp, not one of them asking for details. They didn't need details. They only needed the name. Lily, Jake's daughter, the daughter of a man who once bled beside them. Hawk swung his leg over his Harley, gripping the handlebars with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. And when the engines rose together, 97 strong, it didn't sound like bikes anymore. It sounded like a vow. The formation rolled out, headlights stretching across the desert highway in a long, unbroken river of white. Dust kicked up behind them as they carved through the early morning stillness, their rows tightening and shifting with practiced precision. No one spoke through the intercoms. No one cracked a joke or asked how long the ride would take. They all understood. This ride wasn't a journey. It was a declaration. Every mile they crossed pulled the story forward, each rotation of the tires carrying a blend of urgency, guilt, and a fierce kind of hope. Hawk's heart pounded in time with the engine beneath him, steady, unyielding, ready to face whatever waited at the end of this 620-mile stretch of asphalt. Between the lines of roaring engines, the world flickered. A hospital room. Lily curled sideways on a stiff white bed, her breathing shallow, her wrist wrapped, her ribs aching with each tiny inhale. She stared at the ceiling, blinking back tears she wouldn't let fall because she'd learned long ago that crying didn't change anything. No one heard her cries. No one came. But somewhere far away, unknown to her, a wall of engines surged forward, closing the distance between her suffering and the people who would not allow it to continue. Then back to the road, the heat building, tires humming against the pavement, faces set with the kind of determination that can't be taught. The contrast unfolded like two stories destined to collide. The roar of the bikers cutting through the desert and the quiet stillness of a child who believed she had run out of time. And over all of it, a truth lingered in the air, unspoken but strong. Someone had finally come for her. If you're listening to this and you believe, truly believe, that no child should ever suffer alone, I gently ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes in courage. Trolls won't do it, but people who stand for the vulnerable will. Thank you so much for your kindness. Hawk stepped quietly into the hospital room, moving with the hesitant gentleness of a man who had faced battlefields but was now standing before something far more fragile. The beeping machines hummed softly, steady but indifferent, their rhythm a chilling reminder that the girl in the bed wasn't just injured. She was hanging on by threads she didn't have the strength to tie herself. Lily lay curled on her side, her small frame swallowed by blankets that looked too heavy for her bruised ribs. Her hair clung messily to her cheek, her breathing uneven. For a moment, Hawk didn't speak. He just stood there, seeing Jake in the shape of her jaw, in the stubborn lift of her eyebrows, in the quiet strength she didn't yet realize she possessed. She opened her eyes at the sound of his steps. Fear flickered first, automatic, instinctive, then confusion. Then something else, something smaller. Lily, Hawk murmured. She blinked, studying him as though trying to pull a memory forward from somewhere deep and neglected. Her voice came out a thin, cracked whisper. He said no one would come. The word struck Hawk harder than any roadside bomb ever had. Her stepfather hadn't just hurt her physically. He'd starved her of hope. He convinced her she was alone, that she wasn't worth saving. Hawk knelt beside her bed, lowering himself until his eyes were level with hers. He didn't reach for her hand. Not yet, because kids who lived in fear often flinched at gestures meant to comfort. But she reached for him. Her fingers trembled as they brushed his sleeve, tentative, testing whether he was real, whether this moment was real. Hawk's throat tightened. "I'm here," he whispered, "and I'm not leaving." She swallowed hard, her voice quivering like a candle fighting against a draft. "He told me that if I ever said anything, he'd make sure nobody believed me. He said it was my fault, that I make him angry, that I deserve it." There it was, the slow unpeeling of years of silence. Each word came out heavy, like lifting stones from a collapsed wall. "Lily, none of that is your fault," Hawk said softly. "Not one bit of it." She shook her head, fresh tears gathering. "It wasn't just last night. It's been happening since Mom died. He gets mad. He drinks. He hits. Sometimes he locks me in my room. Sometimes." Her voice broke and she pressed her lips together to keep from crying out loud. Hawk exhaled slowly. Not in anger. Not yet. True anger, the kind that burns slow and deep and dangerous, was settling into him like glowing coals. But then Lily said something that snapped a spark inside him into full flame. "My mom." She hesitated, eyes darting toward the door as if afraid someone might hear her secret. "They said it was an accident. They said she fell. But that's not what really happened." Hawk stilled. This was it, the thread pulling the story toward its deeper truth. The breadcrumb that hinted at a bigger danger. The seed of a twist that would explode later. "What do you mean, Lily?" he asked gently. Her voice dropped to a hush, barely audible. "I saw them fighting. I saw her fall. But she didn't fall on her own. He was there. I saw him at the top of the stairs. And afterward, he told me to forget it. He said if I told anyone, I'd be taken away. That no one would want me." Hawk felt the room tilt, just a little, as the weight of her words sank in. This wasn't just abuse. This was something far darker. But he couldn't push her. Not now. Not when her body was breaking and her spirit was bleeding. He leaned closer, letting his voice steady her. "Lily, what you saw matters. And you did the right thing telling me. I believe you. I believe every word you're saying." She exhaled shakily, as if someone had finally loosened a rope tied around her chest. Outside the window, the 97 bikers stood silently in formation, still, unwavering, witnesses to a promise finally honored. And Lily, for the first time in years, didn't feel alone. The quiet in Lily's room shattered the moment the door slammed open. Hawk rose instinctively, positioning himself between the bed and whoever had entered, his posture unthreatening but immovable. And there he stood, Officer Daniel Morrison. Uniform crisp, jaw tight, eyes cold. Two lawyers flanked him like polished shadows, their briefcases already in hand, as if this were a negotiation instead of a child's life. The temperature in the room dropped. Morrison's gaze snapped to Lily first, and even though he didn't raise his voice, the girl recoiled with a fear too deep to fake. Then he turned that same glare on a Hawk. "What the hell is this?" Morrison spat. "Who are you, and why are you in my daughter's room?" Hawk didn't flinch. "I'm the man who made her father a promise." The lead attorney stepped forward, voice smooth, clinical. "Mr. Daniels, my client is well within his parental rights to discharge his daughter. We've already informed the hospital staff. The paperwork is being prepared." Behind him, Morrison's lips twisted into something that might have passed for a smile, if not for the venom behind it. "Pack her things," he said coldly. "We're leaving." Lily whimpered. Just a tiny sound, but enough. Hawk didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He simply said no. The lawyers exchanged glances. Morrison stiffened. "You don't get to tell me no. She's coming home with me. And if you don't step aside, I'll have you removed." "You can try," Hawk said quietly. but you might want to look outside first. For the first time, Morrison turned toward the window, his face drained of color. Down in the parking lot, lined in two perfect rows, stood 97 bikers, silent, unmoving, the weight of their presence louder than any shouted threat. Leather vests, boots planted, arms folded. Not one of them saying a word. Not one of them stepping forward. Not one of them raising a fist. They didn't need to. Even from 3 stories up, their message thundered. She is not alone. One of the lawyers felt the shift immediately. Officer Morrison, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. No, Morrison snapped. They tried to intimidate me. Hawk shook his head. If we wanted to intimidate you, we'd be in this room instead of in the parking lot. They're here, so Lily knows someone finally showed up. The attorney cleared his throat. Regardless, we don't need intimidation. Legally, the child belongs in the care of. Legally, Hawk cut in. The doctors have already noted suspicious injuries. CPS is involved, and you're trying to drag an injured child out of the hospital before sunrise. The lawyer hesitated, just enough to show they weren't as confident as they pretended. Morrison stepped closer to Hawk, too close, his jaw clenched with barely restrained rage. You have no right to interfere in my family. None. And when this is over, when the court sees exactly what you are, I'm coming for her. And for you. Lily trembled, clutching her blanket. Hawk didn't back down. You won't touch her again. The second lawyer, younger and more nervous, finally cleared his throat. Officer, perhaps escalating this isn't wise. With CPS involved and that many witnesses outside. Morrison spun on him. She is my daughter. The words echoed off the sterile walls, loud enough that 2 nurses peeked around the doorway. But what Morrison didn't notice, and Hawk did, was the look that flashed across the nurses' faces. A look that said, we've heard that tone before. We've seen this kind of man before. We're not buying his act. Morrison saw it too, and the awareness twisted his expression into something dangerous. We're leaving, he barked. Now. No, Hawk said again, calm as stone. And that was when Morrison realized something he had not accounted for. Authority meant nothing here. Uniform meant nothing. Power meant nothing. Not against truth. Not against witnesses. Not against a promise finally honored. The lawyers backed up a step when Morrison's voice rose again, fear creeping into their eyes now. One whispered urgently, if we force this now, it could destroy our case. We should regroup. Reluctant. Fuming. Cornered. Morrison finally stepped back. This isn't over, he snarled at Hawk. And then, chillingly, he pinned Lily with a look she would remember for years. It's never over. He stormed out, lawyers scrambling behind him, trying to calm a man who no longer understood the difference between control and desperation. Silence settled again, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the quiet before a deeper storm. Hawk lowered himself back to Lily's side. Her small hand found his again. Is he gone? She whispered. For now, Hawk said softly. He brushed a tear from her cheek. But what we didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that he wasn't done. Not even close. Night settled over the hospital like a heavy blanket, but sleep was nowhere to be found. Down in the parking lot, the bikers had arranged themselves into a quiet, disciplined formation, 8 riders on watch at a time, rotating every few hours. Some leaned against their bikes with arms folded. Others paced slow, controlled steps, eyes sweeping every entrance. No engines thundered now. No voices rose. Their silence had weight. A message as loud as the machines they'd arrived on. We're not leaving her. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly above Lily's room. Hawk sat in a chair pulled close to her bedside, exhaustion tugging at him in slow waves, but he refused to close his eyes. Lily hadn't let go of his hand since the confrontation. Every time she shifted, he felt the tremor of fear still running through her. Then, as though some unseen dam broke inside her, she whispered, Can I tell you what really happened the night my mom died? The question slid into the room like smoke, thin, fragile, dangerous. Hawk nodded gently. Whenever you're ready. She stared at the blanket gathered in her lap, her voice barely rising above breath. They were fighting, worse than usual. She found papers, money he was hiding. She said she was taking me and leaving. He said she wasn't going anywhere. A pause, a swallow, a long, trembling breath. And then I heard her fall. Her shoulders curled inward, as if bracing for impact again. He told the police she was drunk, but she wasn't. She was scared. And he told me if I ever said anything, they'd take me away. That no one would believe a kid. Hawk felt a tightness in his chest, so sharp it almost stole his breath. Not anger, something colder, something more focused, something dangerous to the man who caused all this. He leaned closer. Lily, thank you for telling me. Her voice cracked. Do you believe me? I do. Every word. She tried to smile, but the weight of her memories pulled it back down. As she settled again, Hawk's phone vibrated. He didn't want to interrupt her fragile calm, but the persistent buzzing wouldn't stop. He slid the phone from his pocket. A message. Unknown number. He opened it. Back off. That girl is mine. You don't know who you're fighting. Hawk's jaw tightened. Another message came through immediately. Next warning won't be a text. He turned the screen just enough that Rosa, sitting quietly in the corner, could see. Her eyes widened, rage flaring beneath her worry. He's escalating, she whispered. He's not thinking straight. Hawk didn't reply. His mind was already scanning possibilities, routes, exits, vulnerabilities, who to warn first, how far Morrison might go now that he felt control slipping from his grasp. Before he could respond, the door eased open. Hospital security chief Torres stepped inside, removing his cap with a sigh. Behind him stood a younger guard, pale and troubled. I wanted to check on her, Torres said quietly. It's been a night. Hawk nodded. She's safe for now. Torres shifted uncomfortably. Look, I shouldn't say this, but some of us downstairs were starting to ask questions. About Morrison. About why he tried so hard to rush her out. The younger guard stepped forward. Sir, I've worked with him before. He has a temper. Everyone knows it. Complaints get buried, but it's not the first time we've heard accusations. Lily shrank slightly at the mention of her stepfather. Torres saw it. His jaw clenched. We're keeping a closer watch tonight, he said. If he comes back, we'll know. Hawk nodded his thanks. Torres hesitated at the door. And for what it's worth, those riders outside, they're shaking up the whole building. Staff are talking. Visitors are talking. Phones are out. Someone posted a video of the bikes forming up earlier. He paused. It's already gone viral. There's a hashtag. Hashtag our promise kept. Rosa blinked. Already, people love a story where someone shows up for a kid who's been ignored, Torres said. Your friend in the parking lot. They're folk heroes right now. Lily sat up a little straighter, something soft and stunned flickering across her face. They came for me, she whispered. They came because you matter, Hawk said. That was the emotional turn. The small but powerful moment where Lily began to realize her life wasn't defined by fear or pain or the lies her stepfather fed her. Someone had shown up. Someone cared. Outside the window, the bikers continued their silent vigil, unaware that the world was now watching them, cheering for them, sharing their story. But none of them, including Hawk, knew the truth that was coming. None of them knew Morrison had already crossed a line he couldn't return from. And he wasn't done yet. The first gray hints of morning crept into the hospital corridors just as the long night began to loosen its grip. Hawk, stiff from hours in the chair, stood and stretched his back. In the quiet, Lily blinked awake, the shadows under her eyes darker, but her expression calmer than the night before. A soft knock sounded at the door. When it opened, two figures stepped inside. Older, worn by grief, but carrying a kind of hope so fragile it seemed to tremble with each breath. Grandma, Lily whispered. Carol Morrison froze for a heartbeat before rushing to the bedside, careful not to jar Lily's injuries. Bill, slower, steadier, placed a trembling hand on his granddaughter's shoulder. Tears slid silently down Lily's cheeks as she reached for them both. Hawk stepped back, giving them space. He saw the moment recognition hit Carol, saw how she looked at Lily's bruises, her bandaged wrist, the fear she still carried like invisible armor. Carol pressed her forehead to Lily's and whispered, We didn't know, sweetheart. We would have come. We tried. Lily nodded weakly into her grandmother's chest. He said you didn't want me. He told me you were done with me. Bill's jaw clenched so tight the muscles shook. That's not true, he said, voice trembling. Not for a single second. A moment of healing, quiet but powerful, settled over the room. A moment where Lily learned she hadn't been abandoned. She had been kept away, but the weight of what came next pressed in quickly. Marcus, the attorney, stepped inside, flipping through a folder thick with documents. His tie was loose, his hair a little wild, as if he'd been up nearly as long as Hawk had. He gave Lily a gentle smile. We're going to court in a few hours, he said softly, and you're not alone in this. She stared at the blankets, fingers twisting the edges. Do I have to talk? Only if the judge asks you questions, Marcus said. And if you do, you just tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. Carol held Lily's hand. We'll be right there with you. But Lily's breath quickened, fear curling at the edges of her voice. What if he's there? Hawk didn't sugarcoat it. He will be. Lily shrank, but he knelt beside her, voice steady and low. And when he sees you walking with me, your grandparents, and 97 people ready to ride for you, he's going to realize something he didn't before. What? She whispered. That he doesn't get to scare you anymore. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't bluster. It was truth spoken in a tone as certain as sunrise. Marcus cleared his throat. Hawk, we need to go over your testimony. The judge will want to know your relationship to Lily, why you came, what you witnessed, and why you believe she isn't safe with Morrison. He motioned Hawk toward the hallway. Hawk glanced at Lily. I'll be right outside. She nodded, already leaning into her grandmother. Once in the hall, Marcus's tone shifted, sharper, more urgent. The judge is fair, he said, but she's not sentimental. She needs facts. She needs consistency. She needs to believe you're the stable choice. Hawk folded his arms. I'll tell the truth. I know, Marcus said, but the truth can be twisted. Morrison's lawyer is going to paint you as an outsider, a biker, an unstable influence. You need to stay calm, no matter what he says. Hawk's brow tightened. If he tries to blame Lily, he will, Marcus warned. He'll say she's confused, traumatized, unreliable. You need to be the anchor in the room. If you break, the whole case shakes. Hawk exhaled slowly. I can do that. Marcus studied him for a long moment. Good, because if Lily tells the truth about her mother's death, he paused, lowering his voice, everything changes. The words hit like a tremor beneath the floor. Not just for the custody case, not just for Lily, but for Morrison. Marcus shut his folder. The judge will have no choice but to look deeper. And if that happens, we're not just bringing Lily home. We might be opening the door to a murder investigation. Hawk's eyes hardened. This wasn't just about protecting Lily anymore. This was about uncovering the truth that had been buried for 2 long, painful years. And for the first time in her life, Lily wasn't going into this alone. By the time they reached the courthouse, the weight of what was coming seemed to press down on every step Lily took. Hawk walked beside her, Carol and Bill close behind, forming a protective shield around a girl who had spent far too long facing the world alone. Inside the courtroom, the air felt tight, thick with anticipation, judgment, and something colder. Morrison was already there, seated at the defense table with 2 suited lawyers. He looked composed, polished, until his eyes landed on Lily. A flicker of something dark flashed behind his expression. Lily saw it. She flinched. Carol tightened her hold on her granddaughter's hand. Hawk felt the old soldier rise inside him, but he kept his face still. Marcus had warned him, be the anchor. Don't break. The judge entered. The room rose. The battle began. Marcus started strong, outlining injuries, the CPS call, the suspicious rush to discharge. But the judge wanted more than claims. She wanted testimony. Ms. Morrison, she said gently, will you come forward? Lily froze. For a moment, it looked like she might collapse. But Carol whispered something in her ear, soft, steady, grounding, and Lily rose. Hawk watched her walk to the stand, every step its own act of courage. She took her seat, lifted her trembling right hand, swore the oath, and then she looked at the judge and spoke. At first, Her voice was barely audible. She described the night she was injured, how he'd come home late, angry, smelling of alcohol, how he grabbed her arm, twisting until she cried, how he shoved her so hard she hit the table and felt something crack inside. "And did he help you?" Lily shook her head. Tears welled. Carol pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting sobs. "He told me I fell," Lily whispered. "Told me to get up. Told me not to pretend." The courtroom was silent. Everyone listening, everyone stunned. Then, hesitantly, painfully, she spoke about her mother. The judge leaned forward. "Lily, did you see what happened the night your mother died?" The girl's breath hitched. Hawk held his own breath, barely daring to move. "Yes," Lily finally whispered. "I saw it, all of it." She described the argument, the bank statements, the shouting. The moment her mother said she was taking Lily and leaving. The scream, the fall. "He told the police she was drunk," Lily said, voice trembling. "But she wasn't. She was scared. And he told me if I ever said anything, I'd be taken away. That no one would believe me because he's a cop." A soft gasp rippled through the courtroom. Bill's hands turned white, gripping the pew. This was the emotional peak. The truth she'd carried in her chest like a stone finally lifted into the light. Marcus nodded gently. He knew not to push her further. No more questions. He stepped back. Then Morrison's lawyer rose. A sharp-smelling blood, but not Lily's. He wanted to tear apart her credibility instead. "Lily," he said with a practiced softness, "why didn't you run away if things were so terrible?" She swallowed hard. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" he pressed. "People run when they're in danger." "Why didn't you?" "Because he said I'd end up in foster care. He said no one wanted me." "And you believe that?" Lily nodded. "Even though your grandparents constantly try to contact you?" "I didn't know," she whispered. "Even though you had a phone." He broke it. "Even though," the lawyer leaned in, too close, too sharp. "Even though you now claim you witnessed a murder? Isn't it possible your memories are confused? That trauma distorted the truth? That your stepfather was simply disciplining you and things got out of hand?" Lily's lip trembled. Hawk's fingers curled into fists. But then, quietly, steadily, Lily said, "I know what I saw." The lawyer opened his mouth to strike again. But the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Everyone turned. A man in grease-stained work boots and a collared shirt stepped forward carrying a folder and a laptop bag. "Rico." Marcus straightened, a small smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Your Honor," he said, "new evidence has arrived. We request permission to call an additional witness." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Rico took the stand, swore in, and opened the folder. "What is your occupation?" Marcus began. "Certified automotive mechanic," Rico replied. 20 years. "Did you examine Sarah Morrison's vehicle from the night she died?" "Yes," Rico said, clicking open a photograph. "And I found this." The screen showed a brake line, clean-cut, sharp-edged, unmistakably tampered with. Gasps swept through the courtroom. Rico continued, voice steady. "This wasn't wear and tear. This wasn't corrosion. Someone cut this. And based on the oxidation pattern, it was done just a few hours before the crash. Long enough for her to drive, but guaranteed to fail." Marcus's voice dropped into the quiet like a weight. "Mr. Vasquez, could this cut have been accidental in any way?" "No," Rico said firmly. "This was deliberate." The courtroom erupted. A callback loop closed. Lily's memory of the argument, the hidden money, the danger her mother sensed, all suddenly connected in one sharp, terrifying moment. Hawk felt Lily's gaze on him from the witness stand, her eyes wide with something new. Hope. The truth was finally being heard, and the story was no longer just about saving Lily. It was about justice for her mother, and exposing the man who had tried to bury them both. By the time they reached the courthouse, the weight of what was coming seemed to press down on every step Lily took. Hawk walked beside her, Carol and Bill close behind, forming a protective shield around a girl who had spent far too long facing the world alone. Inside the courtroom, the air felt tight, thick with anticipation, judgment, and something colder. Morrison was already there. Seated at the defense table with two suited lawyers, he looked composed, polished, until his eyes landed on Lily. A flicker of something dark flashed behind his expression. Lily saw it. She flinched. Carol tightened her hold on her granddaughter's hand. Hawk felt the old soldier rise inside him, but he kept his face still. Marcus had warned him, "Be the anchor. Don't break." The judge entered. The room rose. The battle began. Marcus started strong, outlining injuries the CPS call the suspicious rush to discharge. But the judge wanted more than claims. She wanted testimony. "Ms. Morrison," she said gently, "will you come forward?" Lily froze. For a moment, it looked like she might collapse. But Carol whispered something in her ear, soft, steady, grounding, and Lily rose. Hawk watched her walk to the stand, every step its own act of courage. She took her seat, lifted her trembling right hand, swore the oath, and then she looked at the judge and spoke. At first, her voice was barely audible. She described the night she was injured, how he'd come home late, angry, smelling of alcohol, how he grabbed her arm, twisting until she cried, how he shoved her so hard she hit the table and felt something crack inside. "And did he help you?" Lily shook her head. Tears welled. Carol pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting sobs. "He told me I fell," Lily whispered. "Told me to get up. Told me not to pretend." The courtroom was silent, everyone listening, everyone stunned. Then, hesitantly, painfully, she spoke about her mother. The judge leaned forward. "Lily, did you see what happened the night your mother died?" The girl's breath hitched. Hawk held his own breath, barely daring to move. "Yes," Lily finally whispered. "I saw it, all of it." She described the argument, the bank statements, the shouting, the moment her mother said she was taking Lily and leaving, the scream, the fall. "He told the police she was drunk," Lily said, voice trembling. "But she wasn't. She was scared. And he told me if I ever said anything, I'd be taken away. That no one would believe me because he's a cop." A soft gasp rippled through the courtroom. Bill's hands turned white, gripping the pew. This was the emotional peak. The truth she'd carried in her chest, like a stone, finally lifted into the light. Marcus nodded gently. He knew not to push her further. No more questions. He stepped back. Then Morrison's lawyer rose. A sharp-smelling blood, but not Lily's. He wanted to tear apart her credibility instead. "Lily," he said with a practiced softness, "why didn't you run away if things were so terrible?" She swallowed hard. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" he pressed. "People run when they're in danger." "Why didn't you?" "Because he said I'd end up in foster care. He said no one wanted me." "And you believe that?" Lily nodded. "Even though your grandparents constantly try to contact you?" "I didn't know," she whispered. "Even though you had a phone." He broke it. "Even though," the lawyer leaned in, too close, too sharp. "Even though you now claim you witnessed a murder? Isn't it possible your memories are confused? That trauma distorted the truth? That your stepfather was simply disciplining you and things got out of hand?" Lily's lip trembled. Hawk's fingers curled into fists. But then, quietly, steadily, Lily said, "I know what I saw." The lawyer opened his mouth to strike again. But the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Everyone turned. A man in grease-stained work boots and a collared shirt stepped forward carrying a folder and a laptop bag. "Rico." Marcus straightened, a small smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Your Honor," he said, "new evidence has arrived. We request permission to call an additional witness." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Rico took the stand, swore in, and opened the folder. "What is your occupation?" Marcus began. "Certified automotive mechanic," Rico replied. 20 years. "Did you examine Sarah Morrison's vehicle from the night she died?" "Yes," Rico said, clicking open a photograph. "And I found this." The screen showed a brake line, clean-cut, sharp-edged, unmistakably tampered with. Gasps swept through the courtroom. Rico continued, voice steady. "This wasn't wear and tear. This wasn't corrosion. Someone cut this. And based on the oxidation pattern, it was done just a few hours before the crash. Long enough for her to drive, but guaranteed to fail." Marcus's voice dropped into the quiet like a weight. "Mr. Vasquez, could this cut have been accidental in any way?" "No," Rico said firmly. This was deliberate. The courtroom erupted. A callback loop closed. Lily's memory of the argument, the hidden money, the danger her mother sensed, all suddenly connected in one sharp, terrifying moment. Hawk felt Lily's gaze on him from the witness stand, her eyes wide with something new. Hope. The truth was finally being heard, and the story was no longer just about saving Lily. It was about justice for her mother, and exposing the man who had tried to bury them both. When the gavel finally struck wood and the judge called for recess, the courtroom erupted into a storm of whispers and hurried footsteps. But nothing moved faster than the fury burning beneath Officer Daniel Morrison's skin. His jaw clenched so tightly the tendons stood out like cords. His eyes, once flat and calculating, had ignited with something unhinged, something feral. Lily stepped down from the witness stand with Carol's steadying hand at her back. Hawk moved instantly to flank them. He could feel Morrison's stare slicing across the room like a blade. The moment they stepped into the hallway, the tension snapped. Morrison lunged. Not physically. Security was too close for that, but with words sharp enough to wound. He leaned in just far enough that only Lily and Hawk could hear, his voice low and venomous. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "You think a judge and a crying show on the stand can erase who owns you?" Lily froze, breath catching. Hawk moved between them, so fast Morrison stumbled back a half step. "She doesn't belong to you," Hawk said quietly. "Not anymore." Morrison's eyes twitched, a crack forming in the polished mask he'd worn for years. "Oh, she belongs to me," he snapped. "She always will. And when I get out of this, because I will, I'm coming for her. And for you." Hawk didn't blink. "You won't get the chance." A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. Reporters had started drifting from the courtroom, lenses lifting, capturing the moment. Officers from Morrison's own department stood nearby, some watching him with unease, others with undisguised suspicion. The world he once controlled with intimidation was slipping away under his feet. That only pushed him further. "You think this ends in there?" Morrison snarled, jerking his chin toward the courtroom doors. "I'm not done. Not by a long shot." Behind Hawk, Lily's breath trembled. Without turning, he said, "Go with your grandparents. Now." His voice left no room for hesitation. Carol and Bill ushered Lily down the hall, shielding her with their bodies as if bracing against the storm. Morrison took a step as if to follow, and that was the final mistake. Two bailiffs intercepted him. "Sir, step back." He shoved one aside. "Don't touch me." The bailiff steadied himself. "You need to calm down, Officer Morrison." "I am calm," he shouted, red-faced, shaking, clearly anything but. Phones lifted. Recording started. And the man who once commanded authority with a badge now looked like exactly what he was. A threat unraveling in real time. Then, like something tearing inside him, he pivoted and bolted toward the side exit. A collective gasp echoed down the hall. Hawk moved. Fast. But the courthouse doors slammed open just as Morrison burst into the sunlight. For a split second, he stood frozen on the steps, eyes darting wildly, calculating escape routes, calculating desperation. The police presence out front was heavy, officers waiting to escort both sides, squad cars lining the curb. Morrison scanned the scene, saw no opening, then sprinted toward his cruiser anyway. "It's EY," an officer shouted. "Stop." Morrison dove inside, slammed the door, and the engine roared alive. Tires screeched against pavement. Hawk reached the steps just as the cruiser shot forward into traffic, weaving between cars with reckless abandon. Horns blared. People jumped back. The world spun into chaos. Two police units peeled out immediately after him, lights exploding in red and blue. "Officer in flight. Initiating pursuit," blared through a radio. Hawk watched it unfold like a nightmare. Morrison driving with the same rage he had used to control everyone in his life, now turned outward, wild and destructive. Carol clutched Lily on the courthouse sidewalk, shielding her from the sight. Bill muttered under his breath, voice thick with disbelief. "He's lost his mind." Marcus stepped beside Hawk. "This is it. He's done." Whatever happens next, he'll never walk into a courtroom with credibility again. But Hawk wasn't watching Morrison's future. He was watching Lily. Her small fingers gripped her grandmother's coat sleeve, eyes wide, tears streaking down her cheeks, not from fear of losing the case, but from the terrible recognition that the man chasing escape was the same man who'd kept her prisoner in her own home. And somewhere between the sirens, the shouts, and the fleeing cruiser, Hawk felt something settle inside him with absolute clarity. This was no longer just justice. This was survival, and Lily would never face him alone again. The chase didn't last long. For all his rage and panic, Morrison wasn't thinking. He was reacting, flailing for control in a world that had finally stopped bowing to him. A few miles down the road, boxed in by police cruisers, he made one last reckless swerve that sent his car skidding across gravel and into a shallow ditch. Officers swarmed before he could recover. Even from the courthouse steps, the sound carried faintly through the air. The sharp command to step out of the vehicle, the scuffle, the click of handcuffs locking a chapter of terror shut. Morrison was wrestled to the ground, screaming protests no one believed anymore. Hawk didn't cheer. Neither did the bikers gathering in quiet clusters nearby. They simply watched, collective breath releasing, not in triumph, but in relief. A dangerous man had finally been stopped. More importantly, a little girl had been freed. By the time the courthouse reconvened, Morrison was already in custody. This time, he entered the courtroom flanked not by lawyers, but by two deputies, wrists cuffed, uniform wrinkled and dirt-stained. His eyes burned with humiliation and fury, but the judge did not acknowledge it. She looked instead at Lily. Given the evidence presented, the testimony heard, and the events that occurred following this morning's hearing, the judge said, "I am granting emergency custody to Mr. Hawk Daniels." Carol gasped softly. Bill closed his eyes. Lily pressed a hand to her mouth, stunned. And the judge continued, voice firm, "I am issuing an immediate protection order against Daniel Morrison. He is to have no contact with Lily Morrison in any capacity." A sound left Lily, a half sob, half breath of relief she had been holding for years. Hawk placed a gentle, steadying hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering, and for the first time since he arrived, Hawk saw something other than fear in them. He saw trust. Later, outside the courthouse, the world looked different than it had when they first walked in. The sun had risen. The air felt lighter. The weight pressing down on Lily's small shoulders had eased. But something else waited for her. The 97 bikers who had formed a shield around the hospital now stood gathered beside their motorcycles. Conversations hushed as Lily approached. Then Maven stepped forward, carrying something folded across his arms. A small leather jacket. Dark, sturdy, soft from years of handling. On the back, stitched carefully into the panel, was a simple emblem. Steel Wolves, family. Lily touched it with trembling fingers. Is this for me?" Maven nodded. "Every pack protects its own. Today, you became one of us." Rosa helped her slip it on. It hung a little long at the sleeves, but no one mentioned it. It would fit her perfectly soon enough. The moment it settled across her shoulders, the bikers gave a respectful nod, a silent welcome into something larger than blood, larger than fear, larger than the pain she'd come from. Hawk offered his hand. Ready to go home. Lily looked up at him, tears still clinging to her lashes. But for once, they weren't tears of dread or confusion. They were tears born from a feeling she had forgotten she was allowed to have. Belonging. She nodded. Hawk lifted her gently onto the back of his Harley. She wrapped her arms around his waist, leaning into the steady warmth of him, the jacket creaking softly as she settled into place. The engines rumbled to life, not in chaos, but in harmony. A chorus of low thunder that vibrated through the air as 97 riders prepared to escort one brave girl toward the beginning of her new life. The convoy rolled out slow, respectful, giving Lily time to take in the sight of the open road ahead. She lifted her face to the wind, eyes closing, a small smile touching her lips. For the first time in years, she wasn't leaving somewhere she feared. She was riding toward somewhere she could grow. Somewhere she was safe. Somewhere she was loved. Somewhere she could finally breathe. And as the line of motorcycles stretched across the highway, their engines echoing a promise that would never again be broken, one truth settled over everyone watching. Family is not always blood. Sometimes, family is the people who show up. And as Lily rode toward her new life, safe, seen, and protected, the man who hurt her sat behind bars, finally facing the truth he'd tried so hard to bury. But stories like this, they only become possible when people refuse to stay silent. When ordinary people choose courage over fear. When good hearts stand against men like him. So if you believe no child should ever be controlled by someone who hides behind a badge, if you believe Lily deserved better, if you believe the strong exist to protect the vulnerable, then please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in justice. And let the world see where you stand. Comment, "I stand for Lily," if you refuse to side with men like Daniel Morrison. Every comment, every share, every voice is another blow against the people who think they can get away with hurting those who can't fight back.